Hello, I'm Bob Ganzak. Welcome to MotivationU the Podcast. Hello, I'm Bob Ganzak, and this is MotivationU the Podcast, coming to you live from Celebration Point at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill inside the Coach's Podcast Room. And we had a wonderful Gator victory this past week, and we're going for another one this week. So with me today, for her second time here, Vicki Guy from Elevate Leadership Institute. And welcome, Vicki. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to be back.
It's always great to talk leadership with people that live in that leadership world. And Vicki and I were talking right before we got on, and we're going to get into some areas of maybe how leaders can stretch outside their comfort zone. And sometimes we don't know that we may be doing something wrong until somebody points it out to us. And then it's not necessarily wrong after that. I'll explain to that in a moment. First of all, I want to let you know that we do have a Dale Carnegie class coming up here in Gainesville. You can still sign up for it. It starts this coming Tuesday at Hotel Indigo right here at Celebration Point. We have got a great group of people that are ready to jump into that arena again, and we'd love to have more people join us. You can find that at jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com. That's jacksonville.dalecarnegie.com. Go to Find Courses, scroll down to where the Gainesville class is, and go ahead and sign up right there and join us. Managing stress, we're going to deal with that for 8 consecutive weeks, and we'd love to have you with us. It's a fantastic program. So let's get back to Vicki here. Welcome.
That program sounds fantastic.
It is.
Yeah.
It is absolutely. The thing I hear the most is life-changing. Mm-hmm. And, I hear that all the time. This is life-changing, Bob. And then I think back to when I went through it in 1991, and I go, wow, it really was life-changing. Yeah. It changed my life, and it put me on a career path that 28 years later, or whatever it was, I joined Dale Carnegie myself. So it's, not that long. How long would that have been? That would have been like 18 years later.
Yesterday.
Yeah,
just
18
yesterday.
years later.
Yeah.
Whatever. So you just came back from an incredible adventure, and we were talking about your camping trip. And how does that have to do with leadership, Bob? Share with us what you did on that excursion and how you got involved and what it was like.
Sure. So I'm an avid hiker. I love the outdoors. I like hiking. And I have a great client on the West Coast. And so she said, hey, while you're out here, why don't you do some camping? And so I took advantage of the fact that I'm already there on the West Coast. And so I signed up for a trip. It was a 4-night camping trip, Mount Rainier. Not climbing to the summit, but just climbing around Mount Rainier.
When you say you climb around it, like what is the terrain? I mean, are you actually going up rocks or?
You are. You're hiking up, so
okay.
There's elevation.
All right.
Not terrible elevation, but enough elevation for you to not be able to breathe that well at times. Get a little breathless, and it was pretty hot this trip as well. So. It was a fantastic trip. Sometimes the thought of sleeping in a tent for 4 nights with no electricity, no air conditioning, no showers, that can be a bit intimidating. Mm-hmm. But personally, I find it exhilarating.
Yeah. Now, people think of mountains. They think of it always goes in my mind colder weather. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was hot there, right? It was like.
It was warm. It was. a bit of a heat wave coming through the Seattle area, and so we think we got into the low 100s. And so during the day it was pretty warm. At night it definitely cooled down, but it was still
Muggy,
it was pretty hot.
thick, yeah, tough to breathe. So, after a day of hiking, like how many miles would you do a day of when you're hiking?
We, gosh, I'd have to go back and think about it. It felt like a long time sometimes because you're with a group of about 10 to 12 people. And so you have to, some people go slower, some people go faster, so you're stopping quite a bit along the way. Some days we would average, 5 miles. Sometimes it would be 8 to 9 miles,
Wow.
depending on the day and the amount of elevation gain.
And what is the evenings like? I mean, do you sit around like a campfire, you talk, you chat? You recall what happened during the day or stories?
You tell stories, you tell jokes. We had an amazing guide on this particular trip who he was not only a tap dancer, but also a trained actor.
Wow.
He did stand-up comedy, and so he would get up and do, not necessarily just comedy, but he would do monologues. So he entertained us quite a bit on this trip. But mostly you would tell stories and get to know each other because on this particular trip, most people were strangers. And so you really got to learn a little bit about people that you'd never met before and find out where your common ground might be. So it's always interesting.
So you had like 10 people there, all walks of life coming together for this one event through REI. And this program is about leadership. Were you able to sit back and observe the other people and see who jumped to take control in certain areas and what type of personalities like leaped out that kind of elevated themselves, poor use of words, elevated themselves on your trip?
It's interesting. I've done several types of trips like this, and there's really a couple things that always show up with individuals in different ways. But it doesn't matter what the group is made of. There's always a couple of characters that fit this bill. And usually you have people that are very optimistic, very energetic. They're pushing the group. Come on, you can do it. They're helping others across a bridge or a log or up a rock. And then you've got some people who feel defeated at times, and you can see them really having this internal struggle.
Wow.
And they're struggling to, with that thought of, can I actually do this? And so sometimes they sit back and they take more of a rest, or they don't take the next journey or the next, leg of the hike. And so you see all kinds of attitudes and emotions show up, from fear to defeat to success to enthusiasm, the whole gamut.
Wow, that must be amazing when you see that. And how do the people that don't take that next leg of the journey, how do they catch up to the group? Is there a vehicle that takes them, or do they just drop out?
No, they don't drop out. We wait, and they gather and come and meet us. So,
And when you're waiting, is there criticizing, condemning, complaining?
absolutely not.
No,
No, absolutely not.
that's-
No. So everybody there is there for the experience. So whether it is that you reach a particular point in the hike, or you are just going along for the journey, you're smelling the flowers, you're looking at the nature, whatever it is, everybody just appreciates the fact that you're there and that you're in the moment. Yeah.
A journey like that, a 4-day journey, is kind of like a metaphor of life, though, because that's what we do in life. And you're just taking a small snippet and taking all of these challenges, thrown at you at one time and condensed in together. So it's kind of interesting to see how your community, your 10, 12 people, how they handle those things. We know in the communication world that there's some things we don't talk about when we're with other individuals that we really don't. Politics, religion, and some of those. Did those conversations ever come up?
Absolutely not.
That's amazing.
We definitely stayed away from anything that is potentially divisive. Now, not to say that we didn't share some thoughts and ideas with each other, but there was never that discussion. you saw some differences of opinion and different ideologies show up, but there was never a direct conversation about them.
That's interesting. Now, you also, one of the things I alluded to was tent mate. You selected to have somebody stay with you that you didn't know, but you didn't think anything of that going in until somebody else mentioned it to you. Share that with us.
Sure, yeah. So I signed up for this trip. I knew one person on the trip, but she was already going with her brother. And so they already had their tent situation set up. And so I was a solo traveler, and I shared a tent with somebody that I didn't know, so a total stranger. And when I signed up for it, I never thought about it. And even coming up to the trip, I really did not think much about it until someone said, "So how big is this tent that you're sharing with a stranger?" And I thought, oh, gosh, I don't know how big the tent is. And that's kind of awkward. Yeah, okay, let me think about this. And that's when I started to think about the fact that, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm sharing a tent with a total stranger.
Okay.
But as I mentioned to you before, it typically, when you're doing things like this, it is those that have like-minded people that come together. So it worked out, and I met an amazing woman who is a professional broadcaster in New York, and we just hit it off and had a great time.
That's awesome. Now, in going along in that, as we do talk about leadership in businesses and companies, life is the same way that in that instance. There are things that just happen that we have to kind of deal with. And in that world, it's exactly the same as sometimes as leaders, we don't know what's going on until somebody interjects a negative thought in our mind. So apologize for that phone call. That is Freddie Wiebe trying to get in touch with me. He knows better that I'm in the middle of a podcast, right? So Freddie, don't call me. All right. But isn't that true that as leaders, we go into a project or something and we go in with the right attitude, and then somebody asks us a question and it takes us off center. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's interesting, Bob. Recently, I've been doing a lot of work around the concept of growth mindset. And so what you're alluding to is when someone shows up with that fixed mindset, they're challenging you, they're giving you kind of that doubt whether you can do something or you should do something or you should question your confidence about something. That fixed mindset sometimes can be hard to overcome. But in the research that I've done recently, I have found that just by asking questions and uncovering and really trying to understand where the person's coming from, you can really dissolve that fixed mindset in the face of your enthusiasm or desire to do something.
Okay, I can see that. One of the other challenges with that is that there are some of us in our leadership style that like to instill that into somebody else as a challenge. And sometimes you don't know it's a challenge, but you want to see what that person can deal with in a stressful situation. So maybe mentally you create that stressful situation for them. And that's what that individual did to you, correct?
Absolutely.
So in your leadership journey, what did you learn about leadership from your parents?
Whew, that's a big question. A lot. I think, really, I think your parents teach you so much, whether you know it or appreciate it or not until you're probably an adult. I think most people don't really know what value their parents bring until they're much, much older. I'm at that point now where I can look back and go, okay, my parents taught me a ton. I think the biggest thing I probably learned was patience.
Okay.
Patience for people that are not like me and how to navigate through different personalities, different styles, having patience, because I'm a bit of a driver. So when other people are not coming along with me in that same pace, be able to have that patience to be able to either bring them along with me or sit tight and allow them to take their own journey.
So that frustration builds at times, though, when that person is not going at the same pace you are.
It can, absolutely. As someone like me, who I'm built to, I move forward pretty quickly. When I have an idea in my mind, I'm ready to roll. And so when others aren't as quick as I want them to be, it can be frustrating at times.
All right. So you used to do a podcast, and I kind of teased you about, these are the two individuals as producers when you get your podcast going before. So even drivers sometimes take a back seat, right?
Absolutely.
So what type of person pushes you outside of your comfort zone to do the things that you know you can do and maybe you should do?
Yes, really good questions, Bob. The kind of person, I don't know if there's one particular kind of person per se, but I think I'm very inspired by people who do things that are outside of the ordinary.
Okay.
And I look at them going, and I go, I bet I could do that too. Or what if I could do that? Or could I do something similar to that? So I'm very inspired by people that are doing things that are not ordinary. Not that I will achieve the same success or the same milestone, but those are the people that I look at and go, oh, wait a minute. Cool. That's good for them. Yep. I celebrate them. And I wonder if I can do something like that too. So that is very motivating.
Oh, going back to your parents, the patience side of it, that's a one component of leadership that doesn't always get talked about, right? Was there one of the parents that pushed the patience side more than the other, or that you learned from?
Well, it was more about the fact that they put me in an organization, and we grew up pretty poor, so I couldn't go into like sports or activities. We didn't have money to send me to camps or any of that stuff. So what they did, knowing that I needed a bit more structure and a bit more socialization as a child, they put me into an organization called Job's Daughters. And certainly it's not a religious organization, but it is based on the book of Job from the Bible, where through that they talk about patience a whole bunch, like the patience of Job.
Yeah.
And so that was instilled throughout the entire family through that organization. So from the age of 9 till I was 16, I was going to weekly meetings where we talked about the book of Job and the impact of that in people's lives. Yeah. Wow.
That's interesting. Last night I was having a conversation with two of my friends who are very successful business people, and one of them has sent his kids to private school, and the other one refuses to send his kids to private school. They both could afford to send anybody to private school. It's not the thing. And it was interesting to listen to them talk about that, just out loud as an observer, just to say, wow, we all do see the world from different areas. And the word patience came up so many times. And I never looked at it as patience, Vicki. Yet the one guy said, I can be patient and wait to do the things with my wife, buy the big house or the trips or the vacations. I can be patient to attain that while my kids are going through school. Whereas the other person, they more enjoyed their world while their kids were in, public school. So it was kind of interesting to see that as a just to observe that from a different area. Now,
if I can add one thing to that.
Sure, please.
Because I think patience also, for me, it alludes to taking risks.
Okay.
So, for example, when you take a risk or you do something that's outside of your comfort zone, like you talked about earlier, when you take a chance, you take a risk, you do something that's outside of your comfort zone, sometimes it doesn't go your way. And so you have to really be patient with yourself to learn and understand, like, what was it that did not happen that I wanted to happen, and what can I learn from that? So it's the ability to sit back also and learn from the experiences that you have throughout your life. So I think that's where I'm thinking about patience mostly.
I gotcha. Do you journal at all? Do you write at all?
I am not much of a writer. I mean, I could be, but I choose not to be. And so that's my growth mindset coming in. But I like to talk. So that's why I used to do a podcast, because I like to talk about the things that are on my mind.
I've gone in spurts in my lifetime, where I'll journal for a while and then I'll stop. And then I'll do it again, and I'll stop. And when I stop, I might stop for 3 years. It's not like a month or something like that. But this past weekend, I went back and pulled out some of my old books from like 2017, 2014, 2015, and started reading some of the things I was writing then. And patience and procrastination, I would say, are the two P's that come out the most, because I lacked patience. I wanted immediate satisfaction, yet I didn't push myself to get that immediate satisfaction. I did attain a lot of the things I wrote in my journal, yet it took me a lot of time. So how do you see patience and procrastination, because they can play together? They can play in the same yard, because some people might say, oh, I'm just being patient, waiting for it, when really they're taking no action,
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily about the proactiveness. In my mind, procrastination is, oh my gosh, I have to do that, and I'll do it someday, but not today. Patience to me is waiting for the right opportunity to take that action and being willing to do so when that opportunity rises. And somebody gave me a plaque years ago when I first started into my career, and it said opportunity. And don't wait for your ship to come in, sail out, something like that, sail out to it.
Yep.
And I've always thought about that. To me, that's the difference, is being patient for the right time and then taking action versus waiting for that time and then letting it pass when there is the opportunity.
As a coach, I kind of look at individuals. You and I can tell when somebody may be using the genre of patience and they're really procrastinating. And I guess that was my point, is that sometimes people say, well, I'm just patient, when really, in reality, they're procrastinating.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times the procrastination comes from fear. They're afraid of failure, so they don't want to do that task because it might not happen for them. I saw that in sales so much, that as long as somebody had prospects on their list, they felt good about themselves. If they started calling those prospects and the prospects started saying no, then they were totally, like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? I'm going to fail. And it stops them from making those calls. It's an amazing thing. What type of companies do you work with your organization when you're bringing leadership to them?
Several different types of industries. I don't focus on one industry,
Okay.
but I have a background in the supply chain industry. So I used to work internally with a supply chain company. So right now I work with a lot of supply chain manufacturing companies. Just happens to be that way right now. And what you just mentioned is interesting, because recently I've been doing this exercise with some of my clients where putting them in situations where they could take a chance and do something, but they don't. And when we debrief it, it comes up as, well, I was afraid to take the chance. I was afraid to fail. I was afraid to do that because I have had my hand slapped in the past, or someone has told me I couldn't do it before. So that fear has crept in.
Yeah.
It creeps in every industry and every profession.
And being the devil's advocate here on that part of the conversation, a lot of people that say that to you, that's manufactured also. Oh, I had my hand slapped before. But when you drill down on it, they never did, And I think we've become a society. We talked about this. I talked about it with John Spence in the last couple of weeks, great leadership guru of the world, is that if we're in a society now, if you don't have the selfie, it never happened.
Right.
And so the opposite of that is that you can throw things out there, and who's going to prove you're wrong?
Right.
And that's why that integrity and that honesty comes back. Yet when you and I are dealing with companies, we take the people that we're dealing with on their face value. Mm-hmm. If they tell us something, we believe it. Mm-hmm. I'm one of those people. I'm going to ask a few more questions, though, to find that out. Go ahead.
Well, you actually made me think about a woman who I'm currently working with, and she was telling me this story about how she's afraid to make some choices or make some changes with her team. And I tried to uncover why. Why was she so hesitant to make these changes or do these things? She said, well, my boss is a little intimidating. And so I tried to understand, well, what do you mean by that? And just like you said, as we uncovered it, kind of peeled it back, this boss had never done anything other than promote this person, given her raises, given her more opportunity, more responsibility. But because she had this, what Andy Stanley calls a paper wall, like these walls in front of her that you could just poke through, she created this perception that he was in her way. And he had never done anything but support her. And so when she realized that this was the case, she was like, oh my gosh, I'm stopping myself.
Yeah.
so
many times. And, there is a title envy. There's a title barrier. Some individuals, as they grew up, they never saw themselves as being able to be COO or CEO or whatever it is, CFO. So they get to a certain point and they put in their mind that this is as high as I can go. And when that individual that is trying to get them to move to that next level and coaching them to do that, that's when they become the barrier. It's their fault. It's not my fault. Yeah. And it's usually, I've always noticed that, we're motivated by one of two things. The fear that is the fire that's at our tail that's going to burn us, or that pot of gold out on our horizon that we're looking for. And so many people are motivated by one of those two things. And I've never really done a study on which one is more successful, the one that is motivated by the fire or the one that is motivated by the goal out at the other end.
It's probably a little bit of a balance, I would imagine. Recently I saw an interview with Michael Phelps, Olympics, one of the best Olympic all-time swimmers ever. Good or bad, whatever you think about him, he's highly decorated and successful. And in his interview, I thought it was interesting. He said he's always believed he could. Ever since he was a little kid, he always believed that if he put his mind to something, he could do anything.
Isn't that amazing?
And I thought, wow, that is amazing. Because I don't know that all of us are born with that belief. And some of us cultivate that belief in our childhood. And some of us struggle with it as an adult. Yeah. So I think part of that is, do you even believe that you can? Yeah.
Well, especially like in athletics, sometimes somebody's body shape, form is not what is necessarily thought of as the perfect shape. I mean, he's a tall guy, and I'm not talking about Michael Phelps because I don't know anything about swimming, what type of body shape you need to have. Yet there are so many people that overcome that. I think of a great running back, Barry Sanders. A lot of people said, well, he's only 5'7", 5'8", but he used his skills, to hide behind the linemen and do things. But more than that, it was something that was up here and in here that nobody was going to stop him, and Michael Phelps is the same way. A lot of great athletes or business, there's just nobody's going to stop them. They refuse. So it's kind of interesting. We're going to take a break.
Okay.
So we'll come back in a couple of minutes, talk more with Vicki Guy. I've got a whole line of questioning that I have for you. So, and it's one of the things I love to do. We do not script these. I mean, I really want to push and try to not get the answer that you should give, but get the real answer. Get that real answer from a little bit. Yeah. A little bit. I try to do that. So we'll be back in a moment here at Spurrier's Gridiron Grill at Celebration Point inside the Coach's Podcast Room. This is MotivationU the Podcast.
we still hear it. The sound of victory. The joy of being part of something great. And while things may not be the same right now, we haven't gone anywhere.
If you bleed orange and blue, then Meldon Law is the firm for you.
Looking for more reasons to celebrate? We have them here at Celebration Point. Enjoy some of the newest additions to our already celebratory lineup, like Dave & Buster's, Les Macarons, and Prime and Pearl. There's always a reason to celebrate. Join us anytime for any occasion. Celebration Point, where Gators come to celebrate.
Welcome back to MotivationU the Podcast, coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill inside the Coach's Podcast Room. My name is Bob Ganzak. This is Vicki Guy of Essential Training Concepts. And, you know, the whole concept of this program is to find leaders that don't have huge marquee names, that are just making a difference in people's lives each and every day. And you and I get to meet them all the time. You know, we walk into these companies and we talk to people who are just, you know, they drop the kids off at school in the morning, they come to work, they put in their 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. They just make a difference. What is that element, that thread that you see that runs amongst those individuals that just keep to the grindstone and make differences in people's lives?
You know, I see that a lot, actually. And always, not just are they bringing the fire to their jobs, but they're bringing their fire to their families. They're bringing the fire to their friends, like their community. And I think it probably boils down to personal value. Values, not personal value, but personal values.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that those folks that have that balance and have that drive and the energy, like they're true leaders within their companies, their values are so clear.
You know, I think back in my broadcasting career, I spent 30 years in the radio business, and I think back in my broadcasting career, and I recall certain individuals that should have been the leader or running the program, or they could have excelled, but they just didn't have that confidence in themselves. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how we get to that point, how we have so much talent, but what is it that happens in our childhood that just beats the confidence out of us? Have you ever thought about that?
I've seen it on both sides, really, where, you know, you grow up in an environment where there's a lot of insecurity. Maybe you were picked on, maybe even by your family. Maybe you're picked on by your family or at school for being different in some way. I think that insecurity can breed into the future. On the flip side, I've seen where there's been so much over praise, if that's a word. You know, there's so much feeding into
the helicopter parent.
Exactly, where those folks I see now moving into corporations, they feel like they can do no wrong and everybody should, you know, kind of bow down to them. So I see it on both sides, actually. And it is interesting. I don't know that I have the answer of what happens exactly, but I do see it and believe that it starts pretty young.
You know, I grew up in a family where sarcasm was king. Not being critical of my parents or anything like that. It's just We were just a very sarcastic family. Everybody, was the king of the one-liners. And I think my dad drove that more than anybody else, but we all learned from that. And that was a huge thing that I had to overcome as I went into management, as I got into business. It was a key reason that I left the family company, because I saw that path and I didn't want to be a part of that. But, we've talked about this before. In America, we talk about quick wit and that person, but in a lot of other cultures, that patience is what is really the thing that people admire. And how do you balance that? How do you rinse that out of your system when you get into leadership?
I'm not sure you can ever fully rinse anything out of your system, but I do think, though, I agree with you. I think sarcasm can be a symptom of intelligence and wit. I do believe that. I also agree that in business, sometimes it can be perceived as not pleasant, right? So some people don't receive that sarcasm. If they don't have that same sense of culture or personality, it can be taken the wrong way. And so I think it goes back to what you talked about in journaling and just reflecting and having really high levels of self-awareness on how you're showing up. So that I was talking about the difference between the intent of what you want to accomplish and what impact you want to have on someone's life and the actual impact that they feel. The gap between the two can be vast. And I think for leaders, it's raising your awareness so that you can close that gap. So the intent of what you want to accomplish matches the intent of what people feel.
Wow.
And I think that's a key.
Yeah. I had a professor in college. We're getting close to 50 years ago when I went to college. But I had a professor in college, a psychology class. And on the last day of school, he kind of opened it up to questions. We had no curriculum that day. It was just, we could ask him any question we want. And somebody asked him a question that was just, I can still see him sitting there with a cigarette, which, the professors used to smoke in class, sitting there with a cigarette, looking over his left shoulder, looking out a window, but looking over his left shoulder at the class with his legs crossed and just relaxed up there. And he had a beard and he had long hair. And they asked him, I said, well, why do you teach this class? And his simple answer was, because I need it more than you do. It was therapy to him, and so often I see that in leadership, that role as a leader, as you said, not valuing to a person, but their values, means more to the leader than it does to the incredible job he's doing with his team or her team. It's just an amazing thing. What did you learn about leadership at the University of Florida from your professors? We learned from our parents' patience.
Yep.
What was it about leadership that you learned when you went through UF?
Now you're really making me go way back in my memory. And during a time where I don't know that I was the best student. So I can't say that I dug in. I was not a great student.
Okay.
I was at the university to get through to get a degree so I can get a job.
Okay.
Totally honest, transparent. Having grown up in a situation where we really didn't have means to do the things we wanted to do, I was on a mission. I'm the youngest of 5 children, first one to go to college. I said, I'm going to go and get that degree. So it wasn't, for me, unfortunately, it wasn't about learning as much as I could during that time versus getting a degree to get me to the next step. But that taught me something, I believe, about just working toward whatever you want. And I worked 3 jobs to put myself through school. And during that time, had somewhat success in classes, but wasn't a star student by any means. So I think it taught me that you don't have to always be perfect. You just have to keep going.
Okay, so I'm gonna challenge you here, or try
Okay.
to challenge you here.
All right.
So if I took a clove of garlic, and I put it in a T-shirt drawer, not rubbing it all over I just put it in a T-shirt drawer. When you pulled those T-shirts out, they may smell like garlic, right? Because they've been associated together in a drawer in a condensed place. So even though you weren't the great student, you were still on campus, and there were professors, and what was it that you saw that kind of pushed you in a leadership word, just that word leadership, that you observed?
Well, one of the things that I've always been,
Because we do absorb that.
yeah, we do, and I've always been, one of my core values is learning. I love to learn. I learn random things in random ways at random times, and I love that. And I think looking back, I probably wasn't clear that I valued that so much, but I was absorbing the garlic. I was absorbing all that around me.
Bad
and
analogy, but
no, it's fine. I was learning from it without even really knowing yet, because I was too young to really understand that that was a core value for me. But I was absorbing all that knowledge, but I had no idea that was happening at the time.
My 4.5, 5 years, I stayed on. I was a graduate assistant for the baseball team at the University of Detroit when I went there. But my 5 years coincided with Dick Vitale, the famous sports broadcaster, his years at the University of Detroit as head coach and athletic director. And although I never played for Coach Vitale, he influenced my life so much just by observing him, his enthusiasm. He led with enthusiasm. I mean, you could not walk into a room, and we see him on television now, for those of you that know who he is. We see him on television now, and, we always think, wow, he's crazy, he's corny, he's out of his mind and everything else. Truth is that's who he is. When the lights are off, that's who the man is. He's like that all the time. He makes you feel that you are the most important person in the world. And you know what? You are. You are. So that had a big impact. And my baseball coach had a huge impact on my life as far as doing the right thing. So enthusiasm and doing the right thing. Those were the two things I learned. But I didn't learn a lot from my professors. I was like you. I was there to play baseball. I was on a scholarship, and then I did enough. I had to get that 2.5 GPA in order to stay eligible, so I did that. But I wish I could go back and do it again with the mindset I have now. But
A redo would always be nice. However, what you just said about enthusiasm, surrounding yourself with environments that have that momentum teaches you a lot. I was fortunate I was at the University of Florida when Coach Spurrier was there.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of excitement around the football team and the success that we had in football. And you would think, well, how does that really bleed over into your academics? Well, because the enthusiasm is contagious.
It sure
And
is.
It does help the motivation. People want to be there. When people want to be there, they're happier. When people are happier, they're more motivated. It's a cycle that continues on. So in like anything else, in your job, in sports, your friend group, if you're surrounded with people that are positive, enthusiastic, motivating, it feeds your soul, for sure.
I've talked to people. My daughter graduated from UF, and then she got her MBA from Michigan, and so I'm a big fan of both schools. But I've talked to some of my friends that are from the Michigan area and graduates of Michigan, and talked to them about that, and they hate sports. They absolutely cannot stand sports. Yet that feeling of pride, even they wouldn't turn on a football game or a basketball game or anything. Yet there's this underlying feeling of pride because the team succeeds that, in many cases they never even noticed. We know in employee engagement that's a huge driver, is pride in the organization. Do you see a difference in different industries that you worked with as far as leadership is concerned? Or is there a single thread that can go through all of those?
I don't know that I see a single thread, but if there is a consistency that I do see, it's the most successful teams have the leaders that are, and I'm not even going to say positive, because they're not always positive, but they're just continuing to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
They don't let success or failure stop them, and they're aligning their teams toward a common goal. That is the one thing that I see as a red thread. And they do it in a lot of different ways, but it's having a really clear intended outcome, a really clear shared goal, and driving toward that versus getting kind of stuck in, well, this is why things aren't happening, or this is why we can't do this, or getting even stuck in success, celebrating too long, getting stuck there and not being able to look ahead. I think the most successful leaders that I've seen in the companies I work with are the ones that just keep going forward.
If you had to take 3 elements, 3 distinct traits of a leader, what 3 would you put at the top of your list?
Ooh. I think one of the biggest, this is the biggest for sure, is having a clear vision.
Yeah, I agree
For
with you.
yourself, for others, for the team, for whatever you're responsible. Having a clear, I think that would be my absolute number one, is having a really clear vision. Because if you don't know where you're wanting to go, how could anybody follow you? So I think that that's the most important. And when that vision is so clear and it's communicated clearly, then people can follow that. So I don't know if I can come up with 3, but that's definitely my number one.
I fall into 3 that I always come up with is the clear vision, integrity, and courage. Those 3 things, and there's so many more. I mean, there's communication and everything else. Yet, you got to do the right thing when nobody's looking. That's just paramount. When it comes time to hold others accountable, if you've got to compromise your accountability because of the things that you've done that nobody else knows, you're compromising your accountability at that time. I think that really, and the courage to stay the path. You can have that clear vision, yet, as you said, when we get to that point where things start falling apart, and maybe we haven't conveyed that vision to our team as well as we should have, you have to have the courage to make a change or continue on. So those 3 things I really see.
You bring up a great point in that I recently was working with a client who shared with me a story where their vision's clear. This leader that I was talking to, a very strong, beloved leader within the organization. And this was back when early days of COVID where, well, not really early, but when the vaccines came out and there was a government mandate on vaccines for government employees. And this particular client has government contracts. And so by default, they then also had to mandate their employees to get the vaccine. And so this was a decisive, this was very, controversial. Some of the employees said, I'm going to quit if I have to get the vaccine. It became very, very ugly. And so the leadership team had to back up, get together and talk about what will they do, how will they handle this to maintain the integrity of the values of the organization.
Wow.
And they leaned back on not just the vision of the company, but what they had outlined on their website, to their clients, to their employees, what their core values were. One of their core values is commitment to the customer. And so being able to deliver excellence to the customer. And so the question was, if we don't follow this mandate, how can we possibly deliver on that core value?
Wow.
And so they made their decision based on that. And it was not a highly popular decision.
No, I
and they did lose some employees, but they felt like that was how they could be their authentic selves and staying true to who they are as leaders. Yeah.
That's deep.
It's tough.
Yeah, that is. You know, I worked for a boss that when he first took over, he had a clear vision that was inclusive of all of us, everybody on the team. We had a small team. It was an inclusive vision, and that was inspiring. That was like, that was something like, wow, we all bought into this. The odd thing that happened along the way, and that's where the integrity comes in, is it started, the little bricks started falling out of the wall, you know? It was like the Hoover Dam, and you were trying to stick your fingers in to plug up all of the leaks. What happened was it really came back to the vision that had been instilled in us. The real vision was his, you know, $250,000 motorhome, his RV, you know, his, you know, trips and vacations. Mm-hmm. Fell apart so quick, and that's why that, you know, that vision is one thing, but the integrity to go along with that vision, because you can sell a lot of people. You know, there are some great salespeople that get to be leaders.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes 6 or 7 years for them to find that, for you to find that they are not the leader you thought they were.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we're blinded by the things that people have, or things that they put on social media that they have or do. We're blinded by that sometimes, and we mistake that for being authentic leadership. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they are. I'm not judging, you know, whether or not they, but sometimes we can be blinded by that because of what people put out there. Yeah. And so, but eventually we do see the holes that we have to poke.
I was speaking to a group from CSX, Asian, they call it their group APEX, Asian Professionals and Excellence at CSX. It was really a fascinating group. I mean, and we were talking about the art of storytelling in leadership, you know, just being able to convey that story. And something came up, I don't know if it was after or during, where the topic was basically that sometimes we wear too much of our heart on our sleeve as leaders, you know, where we expose too much. What is too much? How do you balance that? I mean, can you be that way? You know, one of the things they said is your Facebook page or those are your resumes, you know. Be careful what you put on there, because your potential employer is going there and looking at it.
Yeah.
And if you're blocking everybody from it so they can't observe it, your potential employer is probably thinking, why are they doing that?
What are they hiding?
So how much is too much to share as a leader, and how do you find that balance?
I think for everybody it's different. You know, there's this, back in psychology days, the Johari window. How much of your window do you open, right?
Yeah,
how much
right.
information do you share or ask from each other? And I think it's personal, you know, depending on the person, what you're comfortable with. I do think, I mean, personally for me, I'm pretty transparent. So when I'm in a work environment, I share a lot of information because I think information is power. Mm-hmm. People feel empowered when they have information. In the void of information, then people make up their own stories. So I think but I do think it's personal, and it's personal style. Yeah. I actually recently saw a masterclass, and this was Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks.
Starbucks, yeah.
And he talked about his story about how he came back as CEO in 2008 and took over Starbucks, where it had been, I think it was 2008, where they were losing a lot of money, and he came back in as CEO, and he addressed the entire Starbucks organization, and he had prepared a speech. And the speech he shared with one of his colleagues to review, and they said, you can't share all this information with all the employees. And he said, why not? He said, because it's too much information. And he got up on stage and he shared it all.
Wow.
And he said the reason he did that is because if he didn't share all that information, if he wasn't completely transparent about his fears, where the company was, what he needed, asking for help, then he would have had to do that journey all by himself. Yeah. And so I think that's a really, I mean, I don't know. I think for everybody it's personal, but I think the more is better.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was sharing with me that another common friend that we have was so transparent and so open. He admired him so much. And then as we went through the conversation, his comment was, he puts too much on Facebook.
Yeah.
So I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, he kind of like tells everything on Facebook. Mm-hmm. And I should have asked the person at that time, how can you compliment the person for being so transparent and being so open, yet criticize them for sharing so much on Facebook, you know?
Maybe it was the type of thing he was sharing.
Yeah.
You know, 'cause
but still, you shouldn't, you know, some of the stuff you shouldn't, but, you know, those of us that wear our heart on our sleeve, which I do, you know, and I have no negative about sharing things with people. There's no agenda. I'm not trying to manipulate anybody. But I know when I'm in front of a class, if something happens and it brings up something that has gone on in my life and I feel it's, you know, something that somebody can learn from, I'll share it, you know. Yeah. And I know I probably get slapped down from
it makes you
corporate
human.
from that.
You know, it makes you relatable. And I think, again, everybody's different in that way. I mean, I'm a fairly private person, but I'm also transparent. Mm-hmm. So I don't put a lot on Facebook. I don't really like social media. I don't spend a lot of time on it. I don't post a lot. But one-on-one or with people that I have the human connection with, I'm an open book. And so I think for everybody, it's just a little bit of a different formula. And I think the end result is, do people feel connected to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Talk to me about, in the last minute here or so, essential training concepts. Sure. What is it, and where can people find it?
Yeah, so my website is etcinleading.com, or just Google me or LinkedIn, Vicki Guy. Mm-hmm. And I am a custom leadership development consultancy. So I do a lot of executive coaching. I do some strategy work with organizations to help them determine succession planning and roadmaps for leadership development strategies within the organization. And then I also run workshops and facilitate discussions as well.
And keeps you on the road a lot.
It does.
And, like you were saying, like the last 6 weeks you've been...
I've been traveling.
Going. That's amazing. I appreciate you coming here again. And I love having this conversation with you because it gives me a whole different, you know, picture of the leadership world. I try to learn something from everybody, and I'm very blessed to have people like you that come here and share your ideas and thoughts with us. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, I can't believe that hour went by so quick. You know, I want to thank our two wonderful producers, Jason Bennett, Tammy Wynn, for helping us out today, and enjoy working with them. Coming to you live from Spurrier's Gridiron Grill at Celebration Point, this has been Motivation U, the podcast.